So, fun fact, before this review series, besides the original, this is the only other one that I saw. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel and another installment in my Texas Chainsaw Massacre review series, where I go through all the other Texas Chainsaw Massacre movies in the lead up to the new film. We're now off the remakes and back to a sequel to the original Texas Chainsaw, also known as Texas Chainsaw 3D. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with reviews of new releases, older films, hidden gems, and so much more on a near daily basis. But let's not waste any more time and let's talk about Texas Chainsaw. This stars Alexandra Daddario as Heather, a young woman who travels to Texas to collect an inheritance. Little does she know that an encounter with a chainsaw-wielding killer is part of the reward. So, as I've been doing with these other reviews, this will get into spoiler territory. So, if you haven't seen Texas Chainsaw and you wish to know nothing, this is your spoiler warning. Go watch the movie, then come back to this. But now that you've been warned, here we go. This is directed by John Lucenhop, who only directed two other films before this, Lockdown and Takers, and who actually hasn't directed the movie since this. And as I said, this is a sequel to the original 1974 movie, completely ignoring the two reboot films from Platinum Dunes. But there's a bit of a twist, as this actually did something that wasn't yet a trend in the film industry, and that's also completely disregarding the second, third, and fourth movies, making it a requel, as they say in the new Scream. This starts off by showing us the end of the first movie, and then following it with the direct aftermath of those events before jumping ahead to what we assume is the present day, that being 2013, or really 2012, as this was released in early 2013 and filmed in 2012. But either way, it's never specifically said what year or time period it is, but we see characters using modern technology like cell phones, so it's safe to assume that. And that's important to keep in mind for a little later. And the thing with this is, it could have potentially kicked off that requel trend a little earlier than when Halloween 2018 made it popular, had this been a better movie. Instead, it got some of the worst reviews of this franchise, only grossing $47 million against its $20 million budget, and with the only thing it spawned being a prequel of its own, which we'll save for the next video. And when you take one look at this movie, it's really not hard to see why it did so poorly. But we'll start with some positives. For one thing, I thought the beginning of this, where it takes place in the 70s, was fine. Wasn't amazing, but in this part we see some extended members of the Sawyer family, including cameos by Marilyn Burns and Gunnar Hansen from the original movie, in what wound up being both their last films before their respective deaths, and it was cool to see them, as well as Bill Moseley, who takes over as Drayton Sawyer in a cameo here as well. And as for the present day stuff, I actually liked who they cast and thought most of them did a fine enough job. I like Alexandra Daddario. I think she's a good actress, and she worked with what she was given here. Then you have her boyfriend Ryan, who's played by Trey Songz, who I thought was fine. I do remember some criticism was directed towards his performance in particular, but I honestly thought he wasn't bad. Not great, but not bad. The two others accompanying them are Tanya Raymonds, who you might know better as Alex from Lost, as Heather's friend Nikki, who was also cool to see, and you also have Karam Malachi Sanchez as her boyfriend Kenny, who's probably the most disposable of the bunch, and there's really not much to say about him here. He's kind of just there. But the other three are good, and the same goes for Scott Eastwood as the town's deputy, and Tom Barry as the sheriff, known as Sheriff Hooper, who is a clear reference to Tobe Hooper, the director of the original. In terms of these performances, while not great, I will say there are other entries in this series with considerably worse acting, so this is fine for what it is. But that's about all I can really say as far as the positives go, as I really did not like this movie whatsoever. It's not like the worst movie on the face of the earth or anything. You might even get some enjoyment out of it on a so bad it's good level, similar to The Next Generation. But personally, I really couldn't find much that I liked about it. The writing on this movie is, to be quite honest, horrendous. Like, this is easily the worst written of all these movies by a long shot, even beating The Next Generation, which had some pretty bad writing. But while Next Generation made some really bizarre decisions itself, it at least showed consistency with whatever it was trying to do. Almost right out of the gate, this has quite an annoying plot hole that's prominent throughout the entire movie. So it's revealed early on that Alexandra Daddario is actually a member of the Sawyer family, having been adopted as a baby during that opening scene in the 70s, and she's actually Leatherface's cousin. Now, the problem with this goes back to my note earlier about this taking place in the present day. Since Heather was born in the 70s and this takes place in 2012, she'd be nearly 40, Yet they got Alexandra Daddario, who was 25 at the time, to play the part, and it's not like they try giving her the appearance of someone who's older. In fact, I don't even think she's meant to be someone who's older. Like most of these movies, this is meant to be a group of young 20-somethings, all played by 20-somethings, who run into Leatherface. But the way the timeline goes, it makes no sense. And you can't say that maybe this takes place in the 90s or something, because it's clearly not the 90s with some of the technology you see them use. So that becomes something annoying that's just kept in the back of your head throughout the entire film. But even if you're somehow able to look past that glaring plot hole, this still doesn't have much to offer. Now, as I've said in so many of these other reviews, I am fully aware you don't go to these movies for deep, rich character development. A lot of the protagonists just wind up being fodder for Leatherface, and that can be for better or worse, depending on what you're looking for from these movies. All I ask is that there's just some likability to them. Like, even if it's just the bare minimum, just give us a little something so that we can care. But we don't get that here. Now, Heather's technically meant to be likable, but we'll get more to her in a bit, as there's something with her that's in relation to something else I had a problem with. But then you have Ryan, who initially seems likable and caring, but we find out he actually cheated on Heather once prior to the events of the movie with Nikki, who's still secretly hung up on him. And we see her throughout the movie try seducing Ryan, where she lures him into a secluded area to have him to herself. And by try, I mean Ryan barely puts up an argument before almost immediately giving in to her, so there wasn't much of an effort there, which ends up just making them both pretty terrible. The interesting thing about this storyline is the fact that it's never actually resolved. Neither Nikki nor Ryan tell Heather the truth, and they both die before Heather could even start putting the pieces together. It's just a random storyline that only just solidified both of them as pretty terrible before they get killed off. Now, there's actually one character who this does try to get us to sympathize with, which really ends up becoming my biggest problem with this movie, and that's Leatherface himself, which to me is just a big no-no. Now, as I've said in other reviews, Leatherface is technically never the main villain of these movies. He's just the only character who's in all of them. He's always acting under another family member's orders, though in this case we see besides Heather, he's the last remaining Sawyer family member. And here, the main villains are revealed to be the mayor of the town, Mayor Hartman, played by Paul Ray, as well as Scott Eastwood, who's revealed to be his son. And we see in the opening scene, Hartman actually leads this vigilante mob against the Sawyers after what they did in the 1974 movie, and they kill them all besides Heather, though that's only known to her adopted parents until they find out much later on. So now with this reveal that Leatherface is still out there, and they figure out who Heather is, they're out to kill him as well, in addition to Heather when they find out she's a Sawyer as well. Now, while it's obviously bad they want to kill Heather since she didn't do anything wrong, what I didn't like is how the movie spins it so that Leatherface is suddenly some sort of misunderstood victim, and as if what happened to the rest of the Sawyers was a bad thing. Now, I completely understand this is a character with these mental health issues, and that's part of why he is the way he is, and in this timeline of events, he's left all these years unchecked since the 70s, but keep in mind, he's still a murderer. Once he realizes Heather's his cousin, he doesn't want to kill her anymore, but he was ready to do it. And before that, he killed all of her friends. There's still all the characters he previously killed, mainly from the 1974 movie, and his family is full of sadistic murderers. And he might not be in the right state of mind, and there is something to be said about that, but it still doesn't absolve him of what he's done. Not that I don't appreciate a movie trying to make some sort of statement on the issues of mental health, because there can be something really compelling there, but I don't think this is the movie to make such a statement. And even if it were, the execution here was really sloppy and does not justify Leatherface's actions at all. All this really does is just turn this into a movie about bad people versus worse people. Just because the mayor and his son are also murderers, this doesn't suddenly give Leatherface a pass. But what winds up being the strangest part about this whole thing is how Heather completely ignores the fact that Leatherface up until that moment was nothing but a murderer who was even about to kill her. In fact, she fully embraces it, where we even get what's easily my favorite line in this movie.
Do your thing, cuz.
And the movie ends with her being his caretaker, and it's kind of implied she lures people who she doesn't like back to their house so he can kill them, as we see in this post-credit scene where he's about to attack her adopted parents when they visit. Though to be fair, they're kind of terrible people too, but still. And none of that sits right with me. I get trying to expand on Leatherface as a character, as he's never been the deepest one out there. Like, that's what I appreciate about Texas Chainsaw Massacre at the beginning, but making him sympathetic and misunderstood, and then having our lead character openly embrace that, really leaves a sour taste in my mouth. Because even though Leatherface kills a number of unlikable people here, There were still a few of them who were innocent characters, or at the very least, they weren't great but also weren't evil. But the way this ends off seems to completely justify his actions, with nothing really substantive to back it up. And I just can't get on board with a movie if it's doing something like that. Texas Chainsaw is honestly terrible. While it has a solid enough cast and a pretty decent opening sequence, it quickly falls apart due to its absolutely terrible writing. Its characters aren't all that likable, there are gaping plot holes that are hard to overlook, and by the end, it tries to make Leatherface a sympathetic character and completely justify his actions, and that just doesn't sit right with me. Because of how ridiculous some of these elements are, you might get some so bad it's good entertainment out of this, but that's about the most I can say. Texas Chainsaw gets a 1.5 out of 10. It's a shame too, because this isn't even the worst acted one. Some films I thought were a little better than this had worse acting, but the writing is considerably more frustrating. Though, what can you do? But up next, we're on to the final film before I review the new movie, and that's the prequel to this and the original, which gets kind of confusing after a while with the way they all branch off, and that's Leatherface. And in the meantime, let me know, did you see Texas Chainsaw, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Is this the worst one for you, or do you actually kind of like this one? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.